Well, good evening, and welcome to our Friday night Bible study. And
Wife abuse.
I asked her to be quiet so I could start. So now I'm abusing her by telling her to be quiet. Um, this is for Friday, October the 18th, 2024. The month is now more than halfway over. I did get out earlier this week, close to the middle of the month, and mow the lawn one more time. Cross my fingers, hope that's the last time I have to do it this season. Um, but I did a more thorough job than I did the time before. And so at least when I got done, it looked relatively nice, except for the fact that it's dry. There is a section where the vent from the air conditioner, or the drain from the air conditioner, comes out. You know, when you run an air conditioner, you're taking warm, moist air in and making it colder to blow the cold air into the house. So that causes moisture to condense out of the air. And so there has to be a pan under the air conditioner evaporator coils to catch that moisture. And then it gets drained off through a pipe that goes outside. And where that drips outside, that's a constant drip all summer long that the air conditioner is running. And that waters the grass in that section of the lawn. So it's always nice and green. We don't, I suppose we could, but we don't normally water the rest of the lawn. Um, in fact, not a lot of people around here do. Uh, we could probably have a nicer, lusher, greener lawn if we did sprinkle it some during the summer, but we don't bother. This is the week that we switched over from air conditioning to heating. Did that fairly early this week, and
Yes, this little space heater's on. It's going to get too hot with the doors shut.
is it the
If
way?
you could hear that before you get started, I'd appreciate it.
Turn it off, then you'll get cold.
Well, it's going to get so hot, I'm going to have a hard time breathing.
Is it getting hot now?
Not yet.
Well, you let me know when it gets hot because it's been chilly out the last few days, and the heater is running right now. So
I
that's
have.
why that space heater in there has been on for a day or so at the same setting, and it is temperature controlled, so I don't think it'll make it too much hotter for you.
Well, it was on as well as the house heater. They were both on.
Yeah. Though it's possible with that door pulled to that you'll get more heat from the furnace, less of it'll escape out into the hallway. Just a possibility. So then the space heater won't need to come on as much. We'll see. Like I say, if it gets too warm, holler and we'll go in there and do something about
What shall I holler?
it.
Wife abuse. I'm sorry. I'm not putting down, for anyone listening, I'm not putting down wife abuse. I have been in situations where I have been abused, and I am suffering for it now at the end of my life from um, the effects of complex PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to put a brave face on.
Well,
And anybody in abusive situations, my heart goes out to you. I'm so sorry that you have to deal with what you deal with. And that's a lot of what we try to find in our messages trying to point out where God does not want us living in situations where we're abused.
Right.
And I have grown to the belief that the church that I was raised in allows for divorce only in situations where there's been sexual infidelity. That's the only thing that is recognized as biblical grounds for divorce. And the term spiritual adultery was frowned on and put down. But I'm to the point now that if your spouse is abusing you, then he or she is actively damaging your body by damaging your brain. And you're being put into a slow grave, and you really need to get out of it. And God's not going to hold it against you if you act to save your life. By acting to save your life, you may be actually acting to save that of your abuser. If you stay in an abusive situation, then you're condoning the abuse, giving the abuser permission to mistreat you, thereby searing the conscience of the perpetrator.
Well, anyway, I think maybe we just need to go ahead and get started. We were covering the story of Balaam last week, so we're going to continue that story here in just a moment. Let's bow our heads before we begin. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for all the blessings that you give to us, and we thank you that we have time to meet with others and to spend a little time opening your word and examining what it says. We know that the word is limited in its application, and that in order for us to get the fullest benefit, we need to have the guidance and blessing of the Holy Spirit. So we ask that each person who hears this, at whatever time they hear it, that they will open their hearts to the influence and presence of the Holy Spirit, that you might be able to give them a genuine and meaningful blessing. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, let me check here what I want to bring up, and we'll go ahead and switch to our usual camera setup here. Now, what I've got up is something that we read last week, the closing verses of Numbers chapter 22. And we read the whole story of the king of Moab calling on this prophet from somewhere over in what we would later know as Babylon. And this prophet saw the money and wanted to go, but he kept telling him, I can only say what God tells me to say. And he checked with God that night, and God told him not to go. So he told them he wasn't going to go. They went back to the king, and the king said, well, I guess I haven't put enough effort forward. I've got to send more important people, and I've got to send more money. So he did. And Balaam told him, wait overnight. And that night, God told him, be careful what you ask God for. He might give it to you thing. God said, okay, you can go with him, but you can only say what I tell you to say. So God is setting limits, as God often does. So, all right, you've you lust after that money, you want to go, I'm going to let you go, but I have set limits on what you can do when you do go. So he went, and then there was that fascinating story of his donkey and how God enabled the donkey to speak its mind, and somehow that still didn't have a lot of impact on Balaam. He was pretty much fixed on what he wanted to do. So he gets to Moab and he meets up with King Balak. In fact, it says in verse 36 that when Balak heard that he was on the way, he went out to meet him at a Moabite town on the Arnon River at the farthest border of his land. Whoops, ouch, I almost ripped my shirt. I'm going to look that up. I want to know if we can tell what the Arnon River is. Arnon, the river or torrent which formed the boundary between Moab and the Ammonites on the north of Moab. Okay, and afterwards between Moab and Israel. There can be no doubt that the Wadi El Mahib of the present day is the Arnon. Its principal source is near Katrain on the Hodge route. That sounds like it's going to be rough to find. But we'll get into that in a moment. At any rate, they met at that town closest that would be on the eastern border of Moab, and so they had their little discussion. And then it says there in verse 39, Balaam accompanied Balak to Kiriath Huzoth, where the king sacrificed cattle and sheep. He sent portions of the meat to Balaam and the officials who were with him. And the next morning, Balak took Balaam up to Bamoth Baal. From there, he could see some of the people of Israel spread out below them. Now, Bamoth Baal, I looked that up a little bit ago, and then I promptly lost my place going to look something else up. Bamoth Baal, or high places of Baal, a sanctuary of Baal in the country of Moab, referenced in Joshua 13:17, and is probably mentioned in Numbers 21:19 under the shorter form of Bamoth, or Bamoth in the ravine, and possibly again in Isaiah 15:2. So, it was some sort of a high spot in the country of Moab that he took him to, where they could overlook the people of Israel. Some of them, not all of them apparently. Now, where was that? That would be hard to say. But I did look up a place in what I think is probably ancient Moab. And as you can see here, we are looking, if you look at the, well, you can't see the compass rose there. We're looking kind of west of north a little bit here, down a hill. So you can see kind of a plain out there. And if I spin this around, you'll see that the mountains go on up from there. This is just what I could find a street view picture of on Google Earth. They didn't have anything up there on the tops of those mountains. But you can imagine that if you got up in that area, you could see these plains. Now let's get out and let's do my usual reset here, both tilt and compass. So you can see all these mountains off in here. And then if you get off this way toward the plains, there's Medaba. So this is possibly the territory of Moab, and these mountains along here may be the mountains that Balak took Balaam up. And the people of Israel may well have been camped out in this large plain here before they crossed the the Jordan and got to Jericho, which is over in this area just north of the Dead Sea. So that's a guess about what was going on and where these things were taking place. So now we move into the chapter where we're actually getting into new text, and that is in chapter 23. Then Balaam said to King Balak, "Build me 7 altars here, and prepare 7 young bulls and 7 rams for me to sacrifice." Balak followed his instructions, and the 2 of them sacrificed a young bull and a ram on each altar. Now, the information we get from these 2 verses suggests some things that I want to just consider the implications of. First off, the whole idea of animal sacrifice was not unique to the Israelites. Other people did it. And the sacrifice from the night before was done in part to provide meat or food for Balaam and the officials with him. Apparently the officials that Balak had sent, but then it's also possible that there were some officials from Balaam's own country that came along with Balaam. It doesn't say they didn't, so he might have had some people with him. At any rate, this was part of what was going on, is that these were food animals, and so they were slaughtered to provide meat. But they often did that ritually and offered them as sacrifices in a religious sense as well as in the nutritional sense. The other thing that I consider here, maybe this is just my kind of a thing, but we sometimes act as if God dealt with the Hebrews in those ancient days and didn't deal with anybody else. Well, the very presence of a prophet named Balaam, who was not an Israelite, but who lived in the territory of the Chaldeans, and in fact may have been a Chaldean, the ancestor to the Babylonians, suggests that God did deal with other peoples throughout this period. And he did have messengers or prophets who worked among them. And like the Israelite prophets, these prophets were human and they had their failings and their problems, but they did have a connection to the Creator and served to provide a connection between the Creator and these other nations. And that then would have been Balaam's role in his country. He may not even have been the only one, but for some reason, apparently, he was considered to be a particularly effective prophet. And his fame spread, and that's how Balak thought to call on him to get a solution to what he viewed as his problem. Now, as we've noted before, both Moab and Ammon were descendants of Lot. They were cousins to the Israelites. And the Israelites were not coming to take their land. They were coming to take the land that God had promised to them, which did not include the territory of Moab or Ammon. But Balak doesn't seem to have caught on to this. He may have been acting out of fear. He was worried that the Israelites, in such a large horde of people, might easily overcome his own defense forces and take his land away from him. So he wanted to do something about it. wasting a lot of money and effort and so forth for something he probably didn't really need to do. But we get the story, and along with the story, we get the sayings and prophecies of Balaam, which we'll get into here in a moment. Then Balaam said to Balak, "Stand here by your burnt offerings, and I will go to see if the Lord will respond to me. Then I will tell you whatever he reveals to me." So Balaam went alone to the top of the bare hill, and God met him there. Balaam said to him, "I have prepared 7 altars, and I have sacrificed a young bull and a ram on each altar." Well, he didn't do it. He got Balak to do it for him, but it was at his direction. So a lot of times when somebody directs people to do something, we say they're the ones that did it. Well, it was a lot of people who did a lot of these things, not just one. But anyway, the Lord gave Balaam a message for King Balak. Then he said, "Go back to Balak and give him my message." So Balaam returned and found the king standing beside his burnt offerings with all the officials of Moab. This was the message Balaam delivered. And it's given here poetically because as a prophet, he was in part a poet and a writer, and so he gave his prophecies in poetic form. "Balak summoned me to come from Aram. The king of Moab brought me from the eastern hills. 'Come,' he said, 'curse Jacob for me. Come and announce Israel's doom.' But how can I curse those whom God has not cursed? How can I condemn those whom the Lord has not condemned? I see them from the cliff tops. I watch them from the hills." They were on hillsides looking down, so this was entirely appropriate for him to say it this way. "I see a people who live by themselves, set apart from other nations. Who can count Jacob's descendants as numerous as dust? Who can count even a fourth of Israel's people? Let me die like the righteous, and let my life end like theirs." Well, that's a kind of an interesting way to close that off. He has just pronounced essentially a blessing on Israel, saying that you can't curse somebody unless God curses them, and you can't condemn someone unless God condemns them, and God had not cursed nor condemned them. He sees them becoming even more numerous than they are already. And he says, when it comes time for me to die, I want to die like they will. Okay. Then King Balak demanded of Balaam, "What have you done to me? I brought you to curse my enemies. Instead, you have blessed them." Well, Balaam replied, "I will speak only the message that the Lord puts in my mouth." Kind of like, didn't I already tell you this? I can only say what God tells me to say. This is what God told me to say. I have to say it. Then King Balak told him, "Come with me to another place. There you will see another part of the nation of Israel, but not all of them. Curse at least that many." Now this is kind of a revelation of the manipulative nature of the broken human. He can't get what he wants, but he wants to manipulate until he gets at least some of what he wants. He's going to, so in this case, he's going to say, well, maybe if he doesn't see as many people, he can curse a smaller number of them, and maybe I can get them cursed in small numbers and get what I want eventually. Trying to manipulate God, trying to manipulate God's prophet, trying to manipulate the situation. But then that's what people do. That's what broken humans do. When they get in that mode that I deserve what I want, then they begin to think that whatever they need to do to get there is just fine. So here's Balak trying to manipulate the situation. And so it says he took Balaam to the plateau of Zophim on Pisgah Peak. Now Pisgah is a place we'll read about in future pretty soon, I believe. That's another one of those peaks. And there again he built 7 altars and offered a young bull and a ram on each altar. And then Balaam said to the king, "Stand here by your burnt offerings while I go over there to meet the Lord." And the Lord met Balaam and gave him a message. Then he said, "Go back to Balak and give him my message." So Balaam returned and found the king standing beside his burnt offerings with all the officials of Moab. "What did the Lord say?" Balak asked eagerly. This was the message Balaam delivered, again, poetically. "Rise up, Balak, and listen. Hear me, son of Zippor. God is not a man, so he does not lie. He is not human, so he does not change his mind. Has he ever spoken and failed to act? Has he ever promised and not carried it through?" Now, this is all rhetoric, of course, but it is asking questions that have a kind of an obvious answer. And stating some of the long understood attributes of divinity. And that is, divinity is not human. And so there are things that humans do that divinity does not do, like change your mind or lie. When God promises, he does it. He carries it through. He wants us to have that same characteristic, that when we say we're going to do something, that we do it. That was the message Jesus gave. Simply let your yes be yes and your no be no. You don't need to swear anymore then. "Listen, I received a command to bless. God has blessed, and I cannot reverse it." Now understand that we're dealing with people here who had a certain amount of mysticism in their thinking. And, stop to think about it. A man goes up on a mountain, looks out over a nation, and says some things, and we think that's going to have some kind of an effect. Well, if you think of it from reality, non-mystically, no, it's not going to have any effect at all. The guy can get up there on the mountain and he can say whatever he wants to say, good, bad, indifferent. It's not going to change anything but the people who hear his words. And Israel wasn't hearing this. But they believed these kind of things, and they thought, well, this person says something, it comes to pass, so I'll get him to say what I want said, because I want this to come to pass. But essentially what Balaam is saying here is, reality is reality. I can't change it. So if God has decided he's going to do something, then he's going to do it. And what I say won't change it. I can't reverse it. No misfortune is in his plan for Jacob. No trouble is in store for Israel. For the Lord their God is with them. He has been proclaimed their king. God brought them out of Egypt. For them he is as strong as a wild ox. No curse can touch Jacob. No magic has any power against Israel. Of course, no magic has any power against anybody or anything. That's just mysticism. But, sometimes these things happen because people believe they're going to happen. Somebody once wrote, if you think your food will hurt you, it most certainly will. And we know about the placebo effect. If you get something and you believe that something will help you, your condition will improve, even if the thing that you think is helping you is entirely inert and doesn't do anything for you. So, no curse can touch Jacob, no magic has any power against Israel. For now it will be said of Jacob, what wonders God has done for Israel. These people rise up like a lioness, like a majestic lion rousing itself. They refuse to rest until they have feasted on prey, drinking the blood of the slaughtered. Now, that's, as we know, because we know the story, that's kind of like what's going to happen. And so Balaam is approaching it from the worldly viewpoint, but then the Israelites were approaching this whole matter from the worldly viewpoint. So what he's saying here would come to pass, even if it wasn't necessarily what God wanted. Then Balak said to Balaam, fine, but if you won't curse them, at least don't bless them. But Balaam replied to Balak, didn't I tell you that I can do only what the Lord tells me? Now, I wonder why this is, but I have some ideas about what's going on here. Balaam is accurately repeating the statements God has given him to speak about the nation of Israel. And he's going to Balak and say, I can't just say anything, I can only say what the Lord tells me. Well, he could say what he wanted to. He's a free moral agent. He could lie. But I think he had a concern for his own reputation as a prophet, as a seer. And if he said something that he knew wouldn't come to pass, that would cause a disconnect. It would be a failure on his part to accurately forecast, and would damage his reputation. He didn't want that. He didn't want to say these things because he didn't want to harm his reputation. As much as he wanted Balak's money, as much as he wanted to help the guy, he also had to look out for his reputation. Future income would depend on that reputation. And if he messed up his reputation, saying what Balak wanted him to say, then it wouldn't matter how much Balak paid him. He'd have no future income. So that may be what he was doing, and that's why he's thinking, and that's why he's doing what he's doing. It's not that he wants to obey God because he's fully committed to God. He wants to protect his reputation. Then King Balak said to Balaam, come, I will take you to one more place. Perhaps it will please God to let you curse them from there. So Balak took Balaam to the top of Mount Peor, overlooking the wasteland, or overlooking Jeshimon. Balaam again told Balak, build me 7 altars and prepare 7 young bulls and 7 rams for me to sacrifice. So Balak did as Balaam ordered and offered a young bull and a ram on each altar. So we're up to 21 young bulls, 21 rams offered to support this attempt to curse Israel. Now, I want to look this up again. N-O. Peor, a mountain peak in Moab belonging to the Baram range near Pisgah, to which, after having ascended Pisgah, the prophet Balaam was conducted by Balak, that he might look upon the whole host of Israel and curse them. Numbers 23:14 and 28. In 4 passages, Peor occurs as a contraction for Baal Peor. And that Baal Peor is going to be an issue as we come up. So we don't know necessarily which mountain it was, just that it was probably somewhere in that range that we were looking at when we looked at the Google Earth image of that part of the world. So now we reach Numbers chapter 24. By now, Balaam realized that the Lord was determined to bless Israel, so he did not resort to divination as before, whatever that means. Instead, he turned and looked out toward the wilderness, where he saw the people of Israel camped, tribe by tribe. Then the Spirit of God came upon him, and this is the message he delivered. Remember, previously he had gone up to the top of a hill and consulted God separate from Balak and his entourage. But now, he doesn't bother with that. He just gets to this place, the sacrifices are made, and he begins to speak. This is the message he delivered. This is the message of Balaam, son of Beor, the message of the man whose eyes see clearly, the message of one who hears the words of God, who sees a vision from the Almighty, who bows down with eyes wide open. How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob! How lovely are your homes, O Israel! They spread before me like palm groves, like gardens by the riverside. Footnote A majestic valley is possible rather than palm groves. They are like tall trees planted by the Lord, like cedars beside the waters. And this kind of foreshadows some of the prophecies that we would read in Psalm 1 and also in Jeremiah, where we read about being a tree planted by the waters. Water will flow from their buckets, their offspring will have all they need. Their king will be greater than Agag. Their kingdom will be exalted. Now, I'm not sure what that reference to Agag means, because Agag appears later in the story of Saul. I'm just going to look that up here. Agag, possibly the title of the kings of Amalek, like Pharaoh of Egypt. One king of this name is mentioned in Numbers 24:7, that's what we just read, and another in 1 Samuel 15, 8, 9, 20, and 32. The latter was the king of the Amalekites, whom Saul spared contrary to the orders of Samuel. For this act of disobedience, Samuel was commissioned to declare Saul his rejection, and he himself sent for Agag and cut him in pieces. That's what Samuel did, yeah. Haman is called the Agagite in Esther 3, 1, 10, and then 8, 3, and 5. The Jews consider him a descendant of Agag, the Amalekite, but the connection is doubtful. That's a story that's often told about why Haman so hated the Jews, but not all scholars think that's the case. So, their king will be greater than Agag, their kingdom will be exalted. God brought them out of Egypt. For them he is as strong as a wild ox. We've read that before. He devours all the nations that oppose him, breaking their bones in pieces, shooting them with arrows. This is Balaam spouting the common human conception of God at that point in history. Like a lion, Israel crouches and lies down. Like a lioness, who dares to arouse her? Blessed is everyone who blesses you, O Israel, and cursed is everyone who curses you. King Balak flew into a rage against Balaam. He angrily clapped his hands and shouted, I called you to curse my enemies. Instead, you have blessed them 3 times. Now get out of here. Go back home. I promised to reward you richly, but the Lord has kept you from your reward. Balaam told Balak, don't you remember what I told your messengers? I said, even if Balak were to give me his palace filled with silver and gold, I would be powerless to do anything against the will of the Lord, or of Yahweh. I told you that I could say only what Yahweh says. Now I am returning to my own people. But first, let me tell you what the Israelites will do to your people in the future. Not now, in the future. Right now, they're going to leave them alone. So here's Balaam's final message, or messages, plural. This is the message Balaam delivered. This is the message of Balaam, son of Beor, a message of the man whose eyes see clearly, the message of one who hears the words of God, who has knowledge from the Most High, who sees a vision from the Almighty, who bows down with eyes wide open. This is essentially the same thing. Same words as he used to open his 3rd blessing. Now, he's saying his final words here, and he's using the same thing. I see him, but not here and now. I perceive him, but far in the distant future. A star will rise from Jacob. A scepter will emerge from Israel. It will crush the heads of Moab's people, cracking the skulls of the people of Sheth. Footnote B. As in the Samaritan Pentateuch, the meaning of the Hebrew word is uncertain. Okay. Edom, that is the descendants of Esau, will be taken over, and Seir, its enemy, will be conquered. Seir is another name for Edom, while Israel marches on in triumph. A ruler will arise in Jacob who will destroy the survivors of Ur. Now, understood literally, this is just talking about whatever leader of Israel in the future, possibly David himself, would go about defeating the Moabites and the Edomites. And we know that David did, in fact, have victory over these peoples. Edom would be further belayed in the days of the prophet Elisha. A few months back we did a sermon presentation on the miracles of Elisha, and one of them involved a battle against Edom. So, but the very first section here in verse 17 has been taken also as a messianic prophecy. The star that rises from Jacob and the scepter that emerges from Israel, some people like to imagine, forecast the arrival of Jesus as Israel's Messiah and as the world's Savior and Redeemer. So, you're probably aware of that. If not, that is one interpretation of this particular verse. Yeah, it's possible that God had given Balaam a vision, a premonition of how he would ultimately deal with the rebellion of the human race and the non-conformance of this planet within the rest of the universe. Then Balak looked over toward the people of Amalek and delivered this message. Amalek was the greatest of nations, but its destiny is destruction. Now remember, we looked up Amalek before. Amalek was the son of a concubine, and this became a kind of a problem. Then he looked over toward the Kenites and delivered this message: Your home is secure. Your nest is set in the rocks. But the Kenites will be destroyed when Assyria takes you captive. Footnote C, Hebrew Ashur also in 24:24. And of course, the rise of Assyria to a global empire, or at least a regionally dominant empire, would not take place for quite some time. But Nineveh was already there. It was one of the cities that Nimrod built. So, the territory and the people were there and established. And so Balaam is prophesying that at some point this nation will be strong enough. Now, the Kenites lived primarily at peace with the Israelites and assisted them. I think you'll find that in the days of the judges, Deborah and Barak, Barak didn't want to go without Deborah with him, the prophetess. And the prophetess said, well, okay, I'll go with you, but in the end, the glory will go to a woman, not to you. And it was a Kenite woman who invited the commander of the armies that Israel was fighting at that time into her tent, and once she'd gotten him to go to sleep, she took a tent peg and a hammer and ran it through his skull, and then came out of her tent and told Balak and the Israelites, come in and see what I've done. And thus she got the glory for ending that battle. So there was a bond of friendship between the Kenites and the Israelites for a long time. But the Kenites apparently succumbed to the Assyrians. Israel, the northern kingdom, also succumbed to the Assyrians. Balaam concluded his messages by saying, alas, who can survive unless God has willed it? Ships will come from the coasts of Cyprus or Kittim. They will oppress Assyria and afflict Eber, but they too will be utterly destroyed. So at this point, Balaam is reaching into the distant future and making predictions that, as far as we can tell, actually came true many years after his death. Then Balaam left and returned home, and Balak also went on his way. Balak didn't get what he wanted. Not that it would have made any difference if he had, but he didn't get it. He was mad. But we believe, and I think there is a reference somewhere to say so. Maybe this will tell me where that is. Okay, here's the entry on Balaam mentioned in conjunction with the 5 kings of Midian, apparently as a person of the same rank. And that's later in Numbers. He seems to have lived at Pethor on the river Euphrates in Mesopotamia. Such was his reputation that when the Israelites were encamped on the plains of Moab, Balak, king of Moab, sent for Balaam to curse them. Dun, 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 dun. See 2 Peter 2, 15 and 16. Balaam predicted a magnificent career for the people whom he was called to curse. But he nevertheless suggested to the Moabites the expedient of seducing them to commit fornication. The effect of this is recorded in Numbers 25, so we're about to get to that. A battle was afterwards fought against the Midianites, in which Balaam sided with them and was slain by the sword of the people whom he had endeavored to curse. Numbers 31:8. Now, they don't give a reference for how they know that it was Balaam who taught the Moabites to do what we're about to read about. But that is widely understood, and I believe there's a reference somewhere that does explicitly say that he was involved in that. It might be right here in Numbers. We'll come across it. We'll find that out. So, let's go on to Numbers chapter 25. And I wish my wife was awake for this. She read this section. She had trouble with it. She came up with her own version of what she thought was going on. It'd be nice to have her say that, but I think she ate breakfast now. I think she's gone to sleep. While the Israelites were camped at Acacia Grove, the Hebrew is Shittim, but that's the name of the wood, the acacia wood that they would use. Some of the men defiled themselves by having sexual relations with local Moabite women. Or that's as in the Greek version. The Hebrew reads, some of the men began having. So they've rendered it as the Greek version, the Septuagint would have rendered it. These women invited them to attend sacrifices to their gods, so the Israelites feasted with them and worshipped the gods of Moab. In this way, Israel joined in the worship of Baal of Peor, causing the Lord's anger to blaze against his people. Well, the Lord was not angry with the people themselves. He was angry with the separation between him and the people caused by their activities of worshiping this Baal Peor. Baal is a term, by the way, that means Lord, and for that reason some people think it's inappropriate to use the term Lord, as is done here in all capital letters, to refer to the Creator Yahweh, because you're essentially calling him the same thing as Baal. The Lord issued the following command to Moses. Seize all the ringleaders and execute them before the Lord in broad daylight, so his fierce anger will turn away from the people of Israel. So Moses ordered Israel's judges, each of you must put to death the men under your authority who have joined in worshiping the Baal of Peor. Just then, one of the Israelite men brought a Midianite woman. Now, the Moabites and the Midianites apparently had some kind of link, because here they're involved, into his tent right before the eyes of Moses and all the people, as everyone was weeping at the entrance of the tabernacle, or the tent of meeting. Let me double check and make sure that's what that's what the footnote says. Okay. When Phinehas, son of Eleazar and grandson of Aaron the priest, saw this, he jumped up and left the assembly. He took a spear and rushed after the man into his tent. Phinehas thrust the spear all the way through the man's body and into the woman's stomach. So the plague against the Israelites was stopped, but not before 24,000 people had died. Then the Lord said to Moses, Phinehas, son of Eleazar and grandson of Aaron the priest, has turned my anger away from the Israelites by being as zealous among them as I was. So I stopped destroying all Israel as I had intended to do in my zealous anger. Now tell him that I am making my special covenant of peace with him. In this covenant I give him and his descendants a permanent right to the priesthood, for in his zeal for me, his God, he purified the people of Israel, making them right with me, or making atonement for them. Yeah, that's exactly what that footnote is telling us. Well, this is troubling, because it sounds like God got angry at the people and sent a plague to begin killing the people, and he didn't stop until somebody went out there and satisfied God's bloodlust by running a spear through a man and a woman in flagrante delicto, uh, in the act, which is pretty gruesome. It really is. And God is commending him for this. But remember, God's not necessarily commending the act itself. What does he commend in verse 11? He commends the zeal. Phinehas took action. That might have been the wrong action, but he took action to deal with the problem that was causing this plague. The people, by choosing to worship the Baal of Peor and being attracted to it by the sexual practices that the people of Moab linked to their worship. I mean, you look at their origins. They were the descendants of a man whose daughter seduced him so that they could have children in his name. Given that background, it's not that far beyond imagination that they would have problems when it came to sex, and that they might in fact link it into their worship. And so that's what's going on here. These women come into the camp, they entice the men of Israel into false worship, into separating themselves from their Creator through their own womanly wiles. And because of this, now the enemy is given a door, an open door, where God has been neglected, to come in and attack the people. And Phinehas does what he thinks is necessary in order to stop what's going on. And indeed, once in his zeal, he made a statement about the wrongness of what was going on. And what he did may in fact have had an effect on the people watching, that then they knew that the priest's family was taking a position that this debauchery and this false worship was not okay. Then the door was open for the people to come back to God and close the door that had been opened to the enemy to come in and destroy them, and thus the plague against the Israelites was stopped. But it took 24,000 people. Many, many years ago, I took a class which covered quite a number of things. I forget exactly which class it was. I remember who the professor was, and I remember some other assignments that he gave us, and learned some interesting things from them. I do recall that it was from his class. I was working in the home maintenance department, so we did a lot of appliance repair. And in the shop, we had a washing machine up on paint buckets. So we get up under it and work on the mechanism underneath to repair it. And being foolish, as I often am, and not very good at imagining the effects of my actions, I grabbed hold of the washer to scoot out from under it. And in the process, I knocked it off the paint buckets that it was sitting on. My right hand was still under the washer when it came down. And so the washer came down on my right wrist, the edge of the metal, is folded under, but the edge there. So all the way to that washer coming down on that. Now, it wasn't from a great height, but it was from the height of the paint bucket. It came down on that arm, and it hurt like crazy. Well, that night, I had homework to do. And I might even today be able to find that paper. I tried to write my answers on that paper with my left hand because my right hand was so sore. But I'm right-handed, and that didn't work very well. You probably nowadays you couldn't even read it. I might be able to read it since I know what it's supposed to say, but I eventually, after like 5 answers, gave up and used my sore right hand because, as sore as it was and as poorly as I wrote with it, because it was sore, it was still better than trying to write with my left hand. So, that's just a memory of some of the work that I did with this professor. But he made a point here, and I've tried to reproduce it, and I can't do it. And I think maybe he was just imagining this. He went through and counted up how many people died in the wilderness. Remember that when the spies went into the land and came back with their report, the people didn't want to take the land, and God says, okay, anybody who's over 20 will have the next 40 years to wander in the desert. At the end of those 40 years, they'll all be dead, except for Caleb and Joshua. And they won't go into the promised land. So then he went through, he imagined how many men there were. He went through and he counted up all the people who died. And this number, he said, completed that number of people who had to die before they entered the promised land. Like I said, I've tried to reproduce that, the calculations. The problem is how many people over 20 were there. You know, that we're talking about 600,000. You don't come up with that number. So I just haven't been able to reproduce what he said. He said that I think he maybe had come up with a way to make it add up or something. I don't know. At any rate, now we read verses 10 through 13 and how God said that Phinehas had made atonement for the people. He had brought the people back into relationship with God. Now, the way he went about it may have been wrong, but he did get the people back to God. And that's what closed the door and made the plague end. The Israelite man killed with a Midianite woman was named Zimri, son of Salu, the leader of a family from the tribe of Simeon. The woman's name was Cosbi. She was the daughter of Zur, the leader of the Midianite clan. Then the Lord said to Moses, attack the Midianites and destroy them, because they assaulted you with deceit and tricked you into worshiping the Baal Peor, and because of Cosbi, the daughter of a Midianite leader, who was killed at the time of the plague because of what happened at Peor. Now remember, Moses' father-in-law was the priest of Midian. The Midianites were descendants from Abraham and his wife Keturah. So they were close relatives to the Israelites. Step-brothers, in a sense. And now, well, it says the Lord said to Moses, that's what the authors put down. Moses ordered it, and they may have assumed that God wanted it. I don't think God wanted any destruction or any attempts at genocide. That was the human way of looking at things that the people got caught up in. Chapter 26. After the plague had ended, the Lord said to Moses and Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, from the whole community of Israel, record the names of all the warriors by their families. List all the men 20 years old or older who are able to go to war. So here's our second census. There on the plains of Moab beside the Jordan River, across from Jericho, Moses and Eleazar the priest issued these instructions to the leaders of Israel. And so they do that. This is the record. These were the clans descended from the tribes of Reuben, Jacob's oldest son, and their clans. The clans of Reuben, troops registered 43,730. Palu was the ancestor of Eliab, and Eliab was the father of Nemuel, Dathan, and Abiram. This Dathan and Abiram are the same community leaders who conspired with Korah against Moses and Aaron, rebelling against the Lord. And then it tells what happened then. However, the sons of Korah did not die that day. The tribe of Simeon. These were the clans descended from the sons of Simeon. And it names them and says Simeon's registered troops numbered 22,200. The tribe of Gad, 40,500. The tribe of Judah. Judah had two sons, Ur and Onan, who had died in the land of Canaan. These were the clans descended from Jacob's surviving sons. Shilonite clan, after their ancestor Shelah. That's the first reference we have that Shelah did, in fact, live and have sons. Perizzite and Zerahite, those were the twin sons of Tamar by Judah. These were the subclans descended from the Perizzites. These were the clans of Judah. The registered troops measured 76,500. That's probably the highest number of all of them. Issachar, 64,300. Zebulun, 60,500. Manasseh, this is going to be relatively small, 52,700. Okay, not as small as I thought. The tribe of Ephraim, 32,500. It's smaller. The tribe of Benjamin, 45,600. So smaller than Manasseh, but larger than Ephraim, the tribe of Benjamin. The tribe of Dan, 64,400. The tribe of Asher, 53,400. The tribe of Naphtali, 45,400. In summary, the registered troops of all Israel numbered 601,730. So, if we go back to the beginning of Numbers, the numbers there are going to be very similar. And what that's telling us is that the population of Israel during the 40 years in the wilderness did not increase. It stayed about the same. Yeah, in fact, it is just a little bit less. The number in Numbers chapter 1, the total number of all the fighting men registered at that time was 603,550. So we're down almost 2,000 persons from the first one to the last one. Then the Lord said to Moses, divide the land among the tribes and distribute the grants of land in proportion to the tribes' populations, as indicated by the number of names on the list. Give the larger tribes more land and the smaller tribes less land, each group receiving a grant in proportion to the size of its population. But you must assign the land by lot and give land to each ancestral tribe according to the number of names on the list. Each grant of land must be assigned by lot among the larger and smaller tribal groups. In other words, no campaigning. No, I want this, I want that. I don't want him to have this thing or that thing. Do it by chance so that there isn't any of this campaigning and bickering going on about how the land is parceled out. This is the record of the Levites were counted according to their clans: Gershonite, Kohathite, Merarite. The men from the Levite clans who were 1 month old or older numbered 23,000. Levites were not included in the registration of the rest of the people of Israel because they were not given an allotment of land when it was divided among the Israelites. So these are the results of the registration of the people of Israel as conducted by Moses and Eleazar the priest on the plains of Moab beside the Jordan River across from Jericho. Not one person on this list had been among those listed in the previous registration taken by Moses and Aaron in the wilderness of Sinai. For the Lord had said of them, they will all die in the wilderness. Not one of them survived except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, son of Nun. So, there's that story. And we did not yet run across where it says that, and maybe I'll have to spend some time. Well, let me do something here, just a moment. Now, I know this takes up time, but my curiosity is up. Let's see if I can find it by looking in this concordance. Okay. Okay. Just for the fun of it, let's look up the reference that got mentioned earlier in 2 Peter, because it shows up here. There's a lot of references out of Numbers. Oh, well, let's look at Numbers 31:16. We probably won't get that far. We're in 26 today. So let's just read that out of another version here. Whoops. Okay. Numbers 31, verse 13. Moses, Eleazar the priest, and all the leaders of the community went to meet them outside the camp. Moses was angry with the officers of the army, the commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds, who returned from the battle. Have you allowed all the women to live? He asked them. They were the ones who followed Balaam's advice and were the means of turning the Israelites away from the Lord in what happened at Peor, so that a plague struck the Lord's people. So, and that is from the chapter that's titled Vengeance on the Midianites. So that's how we know that in fact Balaam did go on and earn what he wanted without sacrificing his reputation by saying something that wouldn't come true. He said, look, Balak, I couldn't curse them for you, but here's what you can do that will make trouble for them. And it did. It made trouble for them. 24,000 died. Out of 600,000, not a whole lot, but still. And in fact, he may have been paid for what he did, for giving that advice. But that's the biblical reference we have for that event. This is a rather curious passage, He gets mentioned a number of times throughout the story of the Old Testament, both here and in the book of Joshua. One day, a petition was presented by the daughters of Zelophehad: Mala, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. Now, there's the female Noah in the Bible. That's a trivia question if you want to throw people. That Noah. Their father, Zelophehad, was the descendant of Hepher, son of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, son of Joseph. So these women are descendants of Joseph through Manasseh. These women stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, the tribal leaders, and the entire community at the entrance of the tabernacle, or the tent of meeting. Our father died in the wilderness, they said. He was not among Korah's followers who rebelled against the Lord, but he died because of his own sin. But he had no sons. Why should the name of our father disappear from his clan just because he had no sons? Give us property along with the rest of our relatives. So these 5 young ladies, how young they were, we don't know. But these 5 ladies came and said to Moses, our father didn't have any sons, just 5 girls. And then he died, so he's not going to have any sons. And without any sons, his name will disappear unless we get an inheritance for him. So Moses brought their case before the Lord, and the Lord replied to Moses, the claim of the daughters of Zelophehad is legitimate. You must give them a grant of land along with their father's relatives. Assign them the property that would have been given to their father. And give the following instructions to the people of Israel. If a man dies and has no son, then give his inheritance to his daughters. And if he has no daughter either, transfer his inheritance to his brothers. If he has no brothers, give his inheritance to his father's brothers. But if his father has no brothers, give his inheritance to the nearest relative in his clan. This is a legal requirement for the people of Israel, just as the Lord commanded Moses. And what we'll see as we go further on in these rules and regulations about the land is that God intended the land to stay with the family permanently. And in order to enable that, then, in instances where there was no son, the inheritance would not be lost because he didn't have a son. It would go to daughters or to uncles or, some clan member. It wouldn't just go to whoever wanted it. One day the Lord said to Moses, climb one of the mountains east of the river and look out over the land I have given the people of Israel. After you have seen it, you will die like your brother Aaron, for you both rebelled against my instructions in the wilderness of Zin. When the people of Israel rebelled, you failed to demonstrate my holiness to them at the waters. These are the waters of Meribah at Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin. Then Moses said to the Lord, O Lord, you are the God that gives breath to all creatures. Please appoint a new man as leader for the community. Give them someone who will guide them wherever they go and lead them into battle, so the community of the Lord will not be like sheep without a shepherd. The Lord replied, take Joshua son of Nun, who has the Spirit in him, and lay your hands on him. Present him to Eleazar the priest before the whole community, and publicly commission him to lead the people. Transfer leadership, not authority, just leadership. Transfer some of your authority to him so the whole community of Israel will obey him. When the direction from the Lord is needed, Joshua will stand before Eleazar the priest, who will use the Urim, one of the sacred lots cast before the Lord, to determine his will. This is how Joshua and the rest of the community of Israel will determine everything they should do. So, yeah, it did use the term authority there. I don't know if that's in all versions or just this one. But the authority was simply the position of leadership. Here, follow my example. And if you want to obey God, here's what God wants you to do. We will go find that out from priests. And we are in chapter 27. Okay, the NIV uses authority there too. All right. So Moses did as the Lord commanded. He presented Joshua to Eleazar the priest and the whole community. Moses laid his hands on him and commissioned him to lead the people, just as the Lord had commanded through Moses. So, after Deuteronomy comes the book of Joshua, which is the story of Joshua's leadership of the people from the death of Moses forward. And we've just read God's order to Moses that he would go up a mountain, as did his brother Aaron, and would die there on the mountain. The daily offerings, daily burnt offering, 2 one-year-old male lambs with no defects, one in the morning, the other in the evening. So a morning and evening sacrifice. And then the grain and oil offering, flour and oil offering to be made along with it. The Sabbath offerings, the monthly offerings, with detail what they all are. Offerings for the Passover, which takes place on the 14th day of the first month. Offerings for the Festival of Harvest. Okay, skipping on. Offerings for the Festival of Trumpets. Offerings for the Day of Atonement. Offerings for the Festival of Shelters. So, let me go back and review that. So, you have Passover and the Festival of Harvest. Then you have the Festival of Trumpets. Then you have the Day of Atonement and the Festival of Shelters. And that was an 8-day festival. And so that's just spelling out the offering. So I didn't think we needed to get into that in great detail. Laws concerning vows. Then Moses summoned the leaders of the tribes of Israel and told them, "This is what the Lord has commanded. A man who makes a vow to the Lord or makes a pledge under oath must never break it. He must do exactly what he said he would do." This is encouraging godliness. God's not human that he should lie or change his mind. If God promises something, he makes it come to pass. That means that if you make a vow or a pledge, if you tell somebody you're going to do something, you better do it. If a young woman makes a vow to the Lord or a pledge under oath, while she is living in her father's home, and her father hears of the vow or pledge and does not object to it, then all her vows and pledges will stand. But if her father refuses to let her fulfill the vow or pledge on the day he hears of it, then all her vows and pledges will become invalid. The Lord will forgive her because her father would not let her fulfill them. So, let's go ahead and read on, because then together we're going, when we get through this, and I'm going to make an application of it. It is quite misogynistic. I mean, this is patriarchal to the hilt, but this is how the people lived, and this is what God is allowing, not necessarily ordering, but allowing. Now, suppose a young woman makes a vow or binds herself with an impulsive pledge and later marries. If her husband learns of her vow or pledge and does not object on the day he hears of it, her vows and pledges will stand. But if her husband refuses to accept her vow or impulsive pledge on the day he hears of it, he nullifies her commitments, and the Lord will forgive her. If, however, a woman is a widow or divorced, she must fulfill all her vows and pledges. No man to countermand it. She's got to do it. But suppose a woman is married and living in her husband's home when she makes a vow or binds herself with a pledge. If her husband hears of it and does not object to it, her vow or pledge will stand. But if her husband refuses to accept it on the day he hears of it, her vow or pledge will be nullified and the Lord will forgive her. So her husband may either confirm or nullify any vows or pledges she makes to deny herself. But if he does not object on the day he hears of it, then he is agreeing to all her vows and pledges. If he waits more than a day and then tries to nullify a vow or pledge, he will be punished for her guilt. These are the regulations the Lord gave Moses concerning relationships between a man and his wife and between a father and a young daughter who still lives at home. So this is the whole thing there in chapter 30 is all primarily about women making vows. And as we've already pointed out, this is patriarchal to the hilt. This is highly misogynistic. But in that culture, men had authority over women. Men decided what women could do. And in a nod to that authority, even if it wasn't what he wanted, God said, okay, if you're going to be jerks and boss your women around, then I give you 1 day to negate any pledge they make, and then she doesn't have to fulfill it. But we can also take this thing metaphorically. Because in the Old Testament, as we've noted before, the male-female relationship is used as a metaphor for the divine-human relationship. In the New Testament, God is our Father. He was Jesus' Father, and Jesus spoke of him as our Father. He told us to pray to him as our Father. So we have either the bride, we are the bride of Christ, or the father-daughter relationship in our relationship with the Creator. Now, did the human race make a foolish vow or pledge? Well, yes, it did. Through our parents, the first man and woman, they made a foolish vow and pledge to obey, to follow the deceiver. They believed his lies. But then Jesus came to earth. Our Father sent him to this earth. And he denied that pledge and says, no, that pledge will not stand. And because of that, now we who claim God as our Father and Jesus as our elder brother are enabled to break the vow or pledge that binds us in sin and human brokenness. And that it was enabled by the action of Jesus Christ to deny the vow that we made. And so if you take this metaphorically, then it has that meaning to it, that God has stepped in and broken the pledge, the foolish pledge that we made, and allows us, makes it possible for us to go on and not fulfill that vow, to break the addiction, and to find ourselves freed from sin. So, that's the end of chapter 30. Wow. So we did essentially chapters 23 through 30. Of course, we read through some of them rather quickly. And I see that our time is just about up. So I think this is a good place for me to wrap this up and invite you to join us again next week when we will continue Numbers. Numbers has what? How many chapters? 34 or so? 35, 36 chapters, including another reference to Zelophehad's daughters. We may indeed get into Deuteronomy, and it's likely we're going to go through Deuteronomy rather quickly and then get into the book of Joshua and struggle, as we will have to, with all the bloodshed and destruction that takes place as recorded in that book. So, as I say, we plan to be back next week and continue this. So until next week, we say goodbye and God bless.